you're likely to be able to get the permit now, but you may not be able to carry your gun many places. Like the public transit, for instance, will be off limits under this new law as well. So I don't know. Is there a practical difference in your mind now? Or like, how are you reacting to these new restrictions?
You know, it's frustrating that when it comes to the crime conversation in general in New York City, a lot of the loudest voices are the people genuinely and generally least affected. I know, during and now mid and after the pandemic, I ride the subway, and it used to be super safe any time of day and night. And, my friends and I are not super comfortable anymore riding the subway after a certain time of day. And is that always reflected in the statistics that the NYPD releases? Not necessarily. But I think a lot of those who are either refusing to believe that there's a significant problem of rising violence in the city are just people that have never genuinely been afraid in the city and are very insulated from what's happening. When you scroll through the pictures of the victims' families from the 50 people shot in New York City, most of them live in areas that are heavily minority communities, are poorer sections of the city. And the fact that, this permit process, I have the resources financially to apply for it. I have the time to fill out this lengthy application. And I don't know the circumstances of the woman who was killed a few blocks from me last weekend, but I just keep thinking about her. Did she have the resources to get a gun if she had wanted to? Was she able to go through all of this red tape if she had wanted to? It takes a lot of time and resources to secure yourself in the city. And, those who live in nice neighborhoods are much more insulated by default. So I sometimes get frustrated when I speak to people who, grew up in a wealthy area of the country and have never, lived somewhere where, for example, the police take 10 to 15 minutes or more to come, and you really are on your own if there's an emergency situation, or have never lived in a building where you need to make sure that no one's behind you when you open the front door. And I certainly understand why people who have not been around guns are afraid of them. I think that's very real. And I certainly don't think that people who are skeptical of more guns on the streets, even with responsible holders, I don't think that they have bad reasons for making the points that they do. But I do feel that the conversation is a little bit detached from the experience of the most vulnerable people in this city.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. This was actually one of the points raised in a brief to the court from New York public defenders that essentially argued that for young black men in New York City, there is no such thing as the Second Amendment. They just don't have Second Amendment rights because of the reasons you just laid out there. It's exceedingly difficult to actually legally obtain a firearm and carry it in New York. And so people who live in more dangerous areas, even if they aren't criminals themselves, they just interested in protecting themselves. It's basically impossible to do that legally. And so many will choose to violate the law rather than risk, getting killed by somebody else who doesn't care about those laws, right?
Right.
In the first place. And so, you've seen the same. It's interesting because stop and frisk was very controversial, right? But stop and frisk was enforcing this gun law. It was enforcing the licensing laws for having handguns in New York City. That's why they were frisking people. That's the main point, drugs and guns. But often people were arrested for just having a firearm, not having the police didn't have any evidence that they were looking to commit any other crimes with the gun other than just having it on them. And so, yeah, I do think that is a section of the story that often gets left aside, even when we're discussing disparate outcomes of criminal justice enforcement in the United States. Gun laws are often left off that list of talking points. So it's I think it's a legitimate point. But real quick here, just at the little bit of time we got left, I do want to. So you haven't actually purchased any firearms yet, right?
Correct.
But so what are I'm interested as somebody who's looking to make this their first purchase. What are your how is that going for you? I know you've been shooting a couple of times. You talked about that on your social media. How's that process going? What's it been like looking for the right firearm for you?
So I am very lucky because, again, my stepfather does sell guns as a part of his work and is super knowledgeable. I grew up hunting with my stepdad, but I've never really handled handguns. It was always rifles. So I am going to approach this process with a very open mind in terms of what gun I actually get. But I think, like the majority of women, I'm looking for, something that I can handle confidently and easily, that I can learn how to make second nature in case, God forbid, I need to use it. And,
Sure.
Just based on the accessibility of guns here, I honestly wouldn't even know where to go to buy a gun in New York. I would probably try out models the next time I'm at home in Missouri and, be somewhere where that's another obstacle here is in New York City, there's not exactly a culture of a lot of people who are interested in, sportsmanship and marksmanship and safely training people to handle a handgun. So that's also something that is very important to me to be a part of this process. So as much as getting the gun itself will hopefully provide a little sense of relief, I think also, finding the resources to be able to safely handle it and confidently handle it and have others to support is another part of this process.
Yeah, well, I know that we have listeners up in New York, so hopefully some of them maybe can reach out to you and offer
Great.
some help on that front. Obviously, there are a number of advocacy groups that operate up there. I think the Liberal Gun Club has a chapter in New York. They might be a fit for you, given just based off the title of the piece, right?
Right.
That you identify as a liberal, so you're not the only liberal who wants to own firearms or owns firearms in the United States. That's for sure. And then, of course, there are a number of shooting links for women in particular, but there's lots of just general shooting clubs too that exist out there. I think the city makes it more difficult to open ranges, so there aren't a huge variety of them, but they do exist. Unlike in Washington, D.C., where you have to go outside the city to get to a shooting range. But yeah, no, I mean, that's exciting. I think it's I think hopefully some of our readers maybe and some of our listeners can offer you support on that front. I'm always happy to help in whatever way I can as well. But I'm interested in as well in the reaction that you're seeing from publishing this op-ed. I mean, it's the New York Times. It's you're identifying yourself as a liberal who wants a gun. That's not a super common thing to see in the op-ed pages of the New York Times. So what have people been saying to you?
So they always say not to read the comments when you publish something that's personal. I never listened to that advice, for better or for worse. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised. There have, of course, been reactions. People, I got one that said, you're making up your story. I got a few that, said you're much less safe with a gun than without a gun. I'm fine for people to dispute the data. That's not a big deal. I don't take it personally, rather.
Sure.
But I have had an astonishing number of, both close friends and just acquaintances, many of whom are also pretty liberal. Just say like, wow, you made me think about this in a new way. Didn't know you were experiencing this. And I've never thought of this aspect of this conversation. So overall, I worked with an amazing editor who really pushed me to add a lot of the data to anchor my argument beyond just my personal experience. And
Sure.
yeah, overall, I've been very pleasantly surprised.